Hello and welcome to another episode of the Dad Strength Podcast. I am your host, Richie Leahy. Today I'm going to be talking about the growth and development of your child. It's kind of a broad category, and I don't want to go too broad, but I also don't want to go too deep because some of the stuff I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to cover more in depth later. But I know starting out as a brand new parent, you're going to be a little bit worried about your child. When something happens that's never happened before, you're going to go ahead and you're going to have worry. So the first thing that we worried about, and I'm just going to cover a bunch of different topics. So feel free. I'll try to put them in the show notes. I might do jump links. I talked about putting the show up on YouTube. And as I do more in-depth show notes, which was the reason of moving the show to Wednesday, I'm going to try to link to different topics. So if it comes up, hopefully it comes up in search. I want to get more exposure for the show. So just bear with me this episode. I feel like it's an important topic, and I'm going to try to cover some of the worries that I had as a first-time dad and some of the things that you probably hear others talk about. So the first thing that scared me the most was SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. And it normally happens between the age of, I don't think it happens to infants right away, but up until 1 year old. And our daughter turned 1 a month ago. So I'm starting to sleep a little bit easier. But I did worry at first because as she's growing and developing, I was worried that there might be some type of lung issue that wasn't noticed. So they have you look at your baby. They do like general checks, and they can do like some of the blood tests and things like that to make sure that there's enough oxygen flowing through the baby. Another thing that bothered me or worried me was her head. She didn't have control and muscle control of her head. So that was one of the things that they told you to look for. And they tell you not to put the baby down on their belly when they sleep. I know I've talked about like having your baby sleep through the night, but make sure that you pay attention to some of the warning signs and don't put like any blankets or anything in your crib or things like that. Now, I'm not trying to make you feel like put your guard down and then something happens. So please don't get mad at me if something happens or anything like that. I'm just talking from my experience. I know that I was worried about it. So we made sure that the crib was out. A lot of the research that I did on my own made it sound like SIDS could be some type of suffocation. So I always made sure that her pajamas fit well. I didn't want them too big because I didn't want her to roll around, have them get caught in her mouth, in her nose, so she can't breathe. And that would have been the worst thing in the world. We also had one of those motion sensor pads that they sell. So we went to buy a monitor and it was on clearance. Of course, it came with the pad. It was like an older model. We found it at Walmart. I don't even know what we paid for it, but it was on clearance, which was a lot cheaper, over half the price off of what brand new ones were selling. And it came with like a motion sensor pad, and the motion sensor pad did not work. So we contacted the company and they sent us a new one. I think either through Walmart or the company, and I don't know the name of the company. And I know I mentioned some brands before, but I don't like to do spots for different things. I recommend you investigate and read reviews and things like that. So it doesn't matter anyway. But there's a couple different brands for them. But we got the sensor pad, and the second one worked. So it kind of gave us, we had 2 sets of monitors, and we did it in reverse. So her room had the motion sensor pad in the crib, but sometimes it would go off, and then we used the other monitors. We had a Pack and Play or her bassinet that we would put in there. So the motion sensor pad, she had a tough time sleeping on it in the bassinet because it's pretty thick. It's about like, I don't know, a centimeter or 2, and it was highly noticeable. So we didn't really get much use out of it. So while it's good in theory, I mean, sometimes it would go off, and I know my heart would immediately drop, and it would just be that she had And this was whenever she started to get a little bit older. She would roll over and roll off the pad. And her crib's a little bit bigger than a bassinet anyway. So it would set off the pad. And eventually we just quit using it. I know it's a big risk, but I figured I wasn't laying on a pad when I was a child. So for that, that's one of the things. Do your research. As I'm recording this, there might be new studies that are done, and they give you more tips on how to fight SIDS or anything like that. So make sure you do your own research and find out. But that was one of the things that worried me, was their growth and development. She couldn't control her head, and I figured if she could lift her head up, then I'd be a little bit more secure myself at night, because I would know that, like, if she buried her head and she couldn't breathe, she would at least have the muscle development to lift her head up. But up until she could, I was pretty worried. And one of the things that I didn't do, whenever she was sitting up to help build that neck strength, I didn't cradle her head 100%. I would let her move her head around. And she actually was ahead of that developmentally. She did build the neck strength a little bit earlier than what most have. And we had a bumbo chair, I think is what they're called. It's like a little plastic chair that we used. And I tried to use it in the tub too, to have her sit up and bathe. That didn't work because it floated. But it's like a foam chair that she could sit up in. And I started doing that pretty early because I have a video of her trying to color a pumpkin sitting in the bumbo chair. But it was enough where I put pads around her just to see if she could lift her head up as I sat and supported her a little bit, because I wanted her to develop those neck muscles, because I know I could sleep a lot better at night knowing that she could lift her head up if by chance she couldn't breathe in the middle of the night. So that was one of the things I did. Another one is movement. I know we were worried that she only rolled to one side of her development. So make sure you check. It's pretty easy to look online, and I don't want to throw any, I'm probably not going to throw up any developmental charts on the website just in case, because there's always new research being done. I don't want someone to stumble on my charts a few years down the road if they've been updated. So check with your local hospital, even online, your local doctor's office, and see if they have developmental charts. So they're like little checklists that we do with our doctor every time we go in, and they'll tell you what your child's supposed to be doing. And what I recommend for your developmental chart is so you don't get worried when you go to the doctor with that. So for the head thing and the SIDS I brought up, and I'll probably cover SIDS a little bit more in depth in a separate episode, but just developmentally go through the chart and try to practice some of those things with your child to see if they are going to be able to do them or not, because the doctor will need to know. For example, there was one that was follow your finger or an object with their eyes. So what I would do is I would move an object around, practicing it. Hey, look here. Try not to give different cues. So after a while, then I would try not to say anything just to see if she would follow it, because then I'd know that her eyes were developing correctly. And whenever she wasn't mobile, those were little things that I did. I also tried to do developmentally sounds, because I was really worried about her hearing, just because that's one of the things where you might not know. I mean, you can tell if they're having trouble seeing or anything like that based on following objects. But sounds, it's kind of different. And the way they do the sound test is they put a helmet thing on her, and I think some jelly pads, and they tried to track her brainwaves based on sounds. And she cried the first time, so they weren't sure if they were going to be able to do it. And they were like, well, she was crying. Her test results were low, but we don't know if that's because she was crying. So I was worried immediately. I was like, oh man, I hope nothing's wrong. So I'm like, can you retest her? So I had to take her, and this was right after she was born. So I didn't know how to quiet her. I had to take her, rub her back, take her right back in. I was like, please pass the test. I just didn't want her. I wanted her to be healthy as possible. So that was one of the things. So after that, and they were like, well, her hearing might not fully develop until a certain part, but we're just trying to get ahead of it. And that's when I started to take note of these developmental charts. and I recommend that any parent does it. Look up child developmental charts, and you can do it by mostly month, I believe. So it might say like newborn, then it will say like first month chart, or it might do weeks. It might be like week 2 to 6. Your child should be able to do these. Now, these are general guidelines. So don't go look at these charts and say, oh man, my child's behind and I listened to Richie on the podcast and now I'm worried. Don't do that. These are just guidelines. So there were some things that she did ahead. There were some things she was behind on. Whenever she was rolling, she would only roll to one side. So we had to ask the doctor about that. Is that a favoritism thing? Is that something that we should be looking at? It wasn't really on the developmental chart, but we made a note of it. So if you do notice that your child's doing some things that you think that they should be doing, ask your doctor. Whenever they're young, you're going to have checkups pretty frequently. So you want the doctor to be as up to date as possible. And as you go through your first week checkup, your 2-week checkup, the checkups get less frequent and less frequent. So then you have a pretty good gap between your 1 year and your 16th month appointment or whatever comes up. So you want to go ahead and try to track when they're younger, get in the habit yourself. Like, okay, for our next appointment, I know that my child should be picking up objects with a pincer motion so they can pick up their own food. Let me see if they can pick up their own food when they switch to solid foods. We missed some of the developmental stuff because I think I mentioned it earlier. We kind of skipped from soft foods, liquid foods, to solid foods. So some of like the hand, like the scooping, the feed, I think that was on some of the charts we didn't do because she went right into grabbing it with like a claw hand to feed herself. But just check the developmental thing, but don't get too worried. And this is more pronounced if you see a lot of children. So we were in a local mommies group where there are a lot of kids around the same age, and they did play group to give them a social aspect as they were growing up. It seemed like a good idea for us, but that was one area where you could tell certain parents would be worried, like, hey, my child's not doing this, but your child's doing this. Or, the other hand, the worst part, some parents made it a competition where they're developmentally, hey, my child's ahead of your child, blah, 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 blah. And then they always bring, or, hey, my child did that at 6 months, and your child can't do it, with a smirk on their face. But it's not a race. Developmentally, each child's different. So you can't take, I guess you can take pride in that kind of thing, but I wouldn't worry too much about it or worry about what other kids are doing. But it does give you a barrier. I would recommend going to see other kids. It gives you a baseline, not a barrier. It gives you a baseline to judge your child on. And then you can go with the developmental charts. And also, I noticed that when our daughter would see other kids doing things that were a little bit older, she would try to mimic them. So like I could stand up and like try to show her how to sit and stand up all day. Like, hey, stand up. And then as soon as she sees another kid do it, boom, the next day she's able to stand up on her own. So it's not something that like, it might be that she can't mimic adult movements and we do it a little bit different, or she has to see someone else do it. It happened with climbing the steps too. We had a friend over, their daughter climbed our steps, and the next day our daughter was doing it, and well ahead of schedule too. So I do recommend going out, and you might have family, friends that have kids. If not, I do recommend looking online to try to find a play group in your area. And if you're worried about that kind of thing, I know our local library here in North Carolina has like reading time and sort of a play group, and that's where we go to. So you can look for your public services. So don't feel like, I'm worried I'm going to meet someone online, and what if I don't like them, whatever. Look for public play groups. There are some daycares and things that do it too. So I recommend doing that. But developmentally, I was worried about certain things. Like I said, the SIDS and other things that we brought up. But I want to try to cover each a little bit more in detail in the next coming weeks. But I just wanted to make you aware that there are developmental charts. Your doctor will probably go over them with you. So make sure that you're not too worried about it, but you kind of want to know as a guideline, what should my child be doing? How can I help them? If I know that they're going to be learning how their hands move, maybe I should play hands type games with them. If I know that they're going to be using their feet, maybe I should start to hold their hand and try to walk with them and see if they can mimic my movements. So that's what I recommend. Go right now after the episode's over, check out a developmental chart, see where your child falls on a list. And this goes all the way up. Once your child starts to get a little bit older, though, they're more educational standards than they are developmental charts. But from infant up to probably toddler or elementary, there are charts online that your doctor can, or ones that your doctor can provide to you on what to look for. I'll be breaking up into developmental markers in the coming weeks, so make sure that you're aware of them and so that you're not lost. Hopefully that was a nice enough general overview that you can look into them. I know I started with SIDS. Do your own research on that. Hopefully I didn't get you too worried. That was what sparked me between that and the hearing that really made me want to get into the developmental side of things. And as a parent, it's just nice to know. So hopefully that helps out, ease some of your worries. And if you have any questions or anything like that I can help with, please let me know. And feel free to subscribe and tell your friends about it. Thank you. And you have been listening to the Dad Strength Podcast with Richie Leahy.